Did you know that some of the tallest dunes along the US-Mexico border aren't even from the area? Or that a rare coastal wetland still survives because the border accidentally protected it from development? How about the fact that the border has one of the best preserved cinder cone volcanoes in North America? We're talking about one of the most politically charged places in America, the US-Mexico border. But beyond the headlines about immigration and security, the land itself is worth looking into. The geography is insane. So sit back and relax while we take you through 50 weird geography facts about the US-Mexico border. Fact 50. North America's only real sand sea sits on the border. The Gran Desierto de Altar isn't just a patch of dunes. It's North America's only active sand sea, or ERG. The dunes are wind-driven systems that constantly shift and reshape themselves, kind of like waves frozen in slow motion. Spanning hundreds of square miles along the US-Mexico border, this environment is rare, even globally. Most deserts are dry plains or rocky basins, but here the sand dominates. It's land that never settles. Dunes move, rebuild, and even migrate, powered all by regional wind patterns. The Gran Desierto is the only place in the continent where the sand actually acts like a living thing. Fact 49. Some dunes here are 650 feet tall. The tallest dunes in the Gran Desierto de Altar rival skyscrapers. Some reach up to 650 feet, roughly 200 meters, taller than a 60-story building. You guessed it, they're shaped by those relentless winds over thousands of years. What makes them weirder is that their peaks aren't permanent. They shift over time too. Windstorms can literally move the highest point, remaking the dune structure in a matter of seasons. Fact 48. The sand came from a river. Yup, still on the dunes. The huge mountains near the US-Mexico border aren't made from local material. A lot of the sand came from the Colorado River. Over time, river sediments made their way to the delta, where they dried out and got swept up by the wind. That airborne sediment settled inland and eventually formed the Gran Desierto's dunes. So you're looking at ancient riverbed particles that traveled through water and now rise hundreds of feet above the desert floor. It's a rare case of aquatic history being preserved in the desert, not as fossils, but as sand. Fact 47. Lava meets sand at the Pinacate Reserve. The Pinacate Reserve in northwestern Mexico looks like two worlds colliding. One made of black volcanic rock, the other of golden desert dunes. Nowhere else on the continent do lava fields and a massive erg crash into each other like this. The result is an unreal Mars-like terrain, where active geology meets active erosion. The contrast is so extreme that NASA used it to train Apollo astronauts in the 1960s. They needed a place that was like the moon, and this bizarre collision of fire and sand fit the bill. Fact 46. Those huge craters weren't meteor strikes. The Pinacate region is full of massive circular craters, and they look exactly like meteor impacts from above. But these are steam explosion craters, called Mars. They formed when underground magma met groundwater and blew sky high. That quick expansion of water into steam ripped out perfectly round holes in the earth, leaving behind craters that look too clean to be natural. But they aren't calderas or collapsed volcanoes. They're the result of violent underground interactions that happen in a geological blink. Fact 45. The border sits on a spreading rift. The Salton Trough, running from Southern California into northern Mexico, is part of an active continental rift zone. That means the land on either side of the border is slowly pulling apart. GPS data shows the ground here stretching by several millimeters each year. It's basically the early stage of an ocean basin trying to form. The tectonic activity here is so extreme that it connects with the San Andreas Fault system. They're in negotiation, tearing apart slowly over millions of years. And the international border runs right over the middle of it. Fact 44. A 7.2 earthquake split the borderlands in 2010. On April 4th, 2010, the El Mayor Cucapa earthquake struck just south of the California-Mexico border. It registered as a magnitude 7.2 and shook cities like Mexicali. Calexico, and even parts of San Diego. The quake triggered multiple fault segments in sequence, tearing across desert terrain and lifting the ground by several feet in some places. It exposed hidden fault lines and reminded everyone that this region definitely isn't geologically quiet. The US-Mexico border here is a shared seismic zone. When one side shakes, the other does too. Geography ignores national lines. Fact 43. That quake revealed hidden faults. Just a bit more on the El Mayor Cucapa earthquake here, because it changed how geologists see the region. Instead of one obvious fault moving, a whole series of faults slipped together like dominoes. Some of those faults weren't even mapped yet. The event showed how incomplete our understanding of the region's tectonics really is. In this stretch of the borderlands, fault lines lurk under the surface until something sets them off. This earthquake exposed the messy reality under the surface, a fractured zone more complex and dangerous than we thought. Fact 42, a canyon where the river is the border. Santa Elena Canyon in Texas is one of the most striking border markers on Earth. It's about 8 miles long and drops 1,500 feet deep, with sheer limestone walls that close in quick. The Rio Grande flows through the canyon, and here the river is the international boundary. One canyon wall is in the US, the other in Mexico. In narrow sections, the two countries are just 30 feet apart. It's geography doing the work of politics. The river cut a path through solid rock, and we drew a border right down the middle. It's one of the most visual and wild boundary lines in the world. Fact 41. That canyon was carved through ancient ocean rock. Santa Elena Canyon's massive limestone walls are ancient. The rock was formed in a shallow ocean during the Cretaceous period, full of marine fossils and sedimentary layers. Over millions of years, the Rio Grande carved its way down through that ocean bed, creating a slot canyon with one foot in Texas and the other in Mexico. When you float through the canyon or hike along its edges, you're surrounded by vertical cliffs made from ocean floor that's now 1,500 feet above sea level. It's a border, a canyon, and a fossil record all in one. Fact 40. The Rio Grande border has land parcels. When rivers meander, they can trap bits of land on the wrong side. Along the Rio Grande, these are called bancos, land chunks isolated by the river's shifting path. By 1970, boundary commissions had resolved 241 such cases, transferring over 30,000 acres between the US and Mexico. The US gained about 18,500 acres. Mexico got around 11,600, all dictated by geography. The Rio Grande flows through flat, silty terrain, naturally looping and cutting itself off over time. What looks like a stable border on a map is really a slow-moving sovereignty shuffle. Nature redraws lines with every flood, proving that rivers care more about physics than treaties. Fact 39. The border has rules for when rivers misbehave. You get it, rivers are restless. The Rio Grande constantly reshapes itself. But did you know the US and Mexico had to formalize how the border behaves when the river moves? The 1970 Boundary Treaty says, if the river shifts gradually, the border shifts too. But if it jumps suddenly, like in a flood, the line stays put. This treaty is a legal firewall against erosion rewriting international boundaries overnight. Engineers on both sides now monitor and manage the river's course like referees in a never-ending game. When water tries to move the map, they step in to say where sovereignty begins and ends. It's law versus nature, an ongoing contest with no final whistle. Fact 38. One US wetland depends on Mexican rain. The Tijuana River estuary in California looks American, but 75% of the water feeding it comes from Mexico. Stormwater, sediment, and runoff from Tijuana shape the wetlands on the US side, affecting habitat, flood levels, and even pollution. It's a textbook case of cross-border hydrology. Rainfall patterns, urban development, and infrastructure south of the line directly impact wetland ecosystems to the north. And nope, not a matter of diplomacy. It's geography. Watersheds don't recognize borders. They follow slope, gravity, and flow. In this case, American conservation efforts rely heavily on what happens upstream in a completely different country. Fact 37. One of the last wild wetlands survives because of the border. Most Southern California wetlands are gone, paved, drained, or developed. But the Tijuana River estuary still exists, largely because it sits in a kind of limbo zone between two expanding cities. It's an ecological survivor hiding in plain sight. Border restrictions and lack of development have accidentally preserved one of the largest coastal wetlands in the state. While in other places concrete replaced cattails, here the political divide protected tidal channels, marshes, and rare species. It's a reminder that sometimes geography and politics collide in unexpected ways, and nature gets a lucky break. Fact 36. Mountains explode out of the desert floor. In the Sonoran Desert, the land looks folded, like an accordion stretched across the map. These folds are sky islands, steep mountain ranges that rise thousands of feet above flat desert basins. Within a few miles, you can go from cactus-covered plains to pine forests. It's vertical biodiversity. Some peaks hit 8,000 feet and create isolated ecosystems where species evolve differently from the desert below. The contrast is so wild that climate changes faster by altitude here than across entire states. It's a shift in ecosystem, temperature, and even time. It's like driving through 5 states in one afternoon. Fact 35. A biosphere reserve straddles the line. Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument is a globally recognized biosphere reserve. UNESCO gave it that status in 1976 because it preserves an undisturbed piece of the Sonoran Desert. It's a place where saguaros stretch into the sky and coyotes still roam just like they did centuries ago. This park borders Mexico, sharing ecological systems that don't end at the fence. It's one of the few border zones where natural continuity was preserved rather than broken. While other parts of the border saw walls and development, Organ Pipe remained wild enough to be recognized as one of Earth's ecological treasures. Fact 34. A cactus that stops at the border. Organ pipe cacti thrive in Mexico, but barely make it into the US. Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument protects the northernmost edge of their range. Cross the border heading north and they disappear. It's a hard line dictated by climate. The desert here is just warm and dry enough to support them. Go a few miles north and it's not. This makes the park a living threshold, where a species runs out of room. The international border here is ecological. One side has entire forests of Organ pipe cacti, the other has none. Geography draws sharper lines than maps. Fact 33. Wildlife runs into a wall. The Sonoran pronghorn is fast, antelope fast. It needs space and lots of it to migrate, find mates, and survive harsh desert cycles. But the border has become a barrier. Development, fencing, and roads break up the land, making it harder for animals to roam. In 2002, a severe drought nearly wiped out the US population. With no access to food or water across the border, numbers crashed. Conservationists stepped in with captive breeding and emergency water, but the warning was clear. Isolated habitats are death traps. The pronghorn's plight shows how artificial boundaries can break natural systems. Fact 32. Survival depends on rain-filled rock bowls. Along the Devil's Highway, El Camino del Diablo, are the Tinajas Altas, 9 natural rock basins that collect rainwater. There are no springs or rivers here. If these tanks are dry, you're out of luck. Early travelers staked their lives on these hidden pools. Each basin can hold thousands of gallons, but there's no guarantee they'll be full. In this stretch of desert, survival hinges on chance, on whether rain came last week or last season. The Tinajas Altas are nature's coin toss. Sometimes they're salvation, sometimes they're stone bowls full of dust. Fact 31. The border extends deep into the sea. The US-Mexico border doesn't stop at the shoreline. Thanks to treaties, it stretches 200 nautical miles into both the Gulf and the Pacific Ocean. Underwater, the border divides fishing zones, oil fields, and even coral reefs. These are invisible frontiers governed by coordinates, not fences. It's geography without land, just legal lines floating in salt water. And yet, the stakes are huge. Billions in natural resources sit under these maritime zones. Most maps ignore this underwater divide, but for governments, fishermen, and oil companies, this is where the real boundary begins. Fact 30. The fence that moves itself. Out in the Yuma Dunes, the border fence is on wheels. Not literally, but it might as well be. This section of border sits on one of the most unstable surfaces imaginable, a live dune field. Wind drives sand across roads, buries infrastructure, and reshapes the terrain every day. Try to build a permanent fence here, and nature's gonna laugh. That's why some fence panels are designed to be lifted and relocated as needed. It's a rare moment where policy yields to physics, a government structure forced to play by the rules of shifting sand. Fact 29. The border as plumbing. Down here, the international line is a plumbing diagram. Rivers like the Rio Grande love to wander, but that makes for messy maps. So engineers from both nations intervened. They've straightened channels, poured concrete banks, and rerouted entire watercourses to keep geography locked to paperwork. This isn't as nature intended. It's just a flowchart with bulldozers. When the river drifts, humans push it back in place. It's an absurd mix of hydrology and geopolitics. Where water doesn't flow toward the sea, it flows where the treaty says it should. Fact 28. Where the walls nearly touch. Santa Elena Canyon's narrowest point is barely 30 feet wide. Two walls of rock, one Mexican, one American, staring each other down from 1,500 feet in the air. Between them, the Rio Grande squeezes through like a string of water. It's honestly weirdly intimate for an international boundary. Walk through and you're wedged in a natural corridor with steep walls that belong to two different nations. It's less a canyon and more a crevice that geopolitics happen to split down the middle. It's geography at maximum compression. Fact 27. Old basins, new lands. Look closely at the flatlands along the Rio Grande. Seem normal, yeah? Far from it. What looks like desert floor is actually the exposed fill of ancient geological basins. These were once deep sediment traps, slowly filled over millions of years. Now, the river has started cutting back through those layers, exposing hidden rock formations and old faults. It's erosion as archaeology and pretty much a history lesson in reverse, with rivers peeling away time to expose the bones of vanished terrains. Fact 26. Born here, but not really. In the early 1900s, an irrigation company dug a shortcut in the Rio Grande, unknowingly shifting the international border. They cut off a chunk of Texas, the Orcon Tract, and stranded it on Mexico's side of the river. Families living there still thought they were in the US for decades. It wasn't until a 1970 treaty formally handed the land to Mexico that passports changed. So you could literally be born in the US one day and wake up in Mexico the next without moving an inch. Geography didn't ask for permission, it just rerouted. Fact 25. The speed limit of sovereignty. According to the treaty, rivers don't get a free pass to redraw maps. If the Rio Grande slowly shifts course over time, the border shifts with it. But if it suddenly jumps in a flood and finds a new channel, the old border sticks. It's a legal distinction with huge consequences, known as accretion versus avulsion. Basically, move slow and you're legit. Move fast and you're disqualified. The treaty turns fluid dynamics into constitutional law, and the river has to follow. Fact 24. A desert island of saguaros without the saguaros. In Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, directly on the Mexican border, you'll find the perfect climate, soil, and elevation for saguaro cacti. But almost no saguaros. This species, iconic to Arizona, mysteriously disappears west of the Ajo Mountains, even though the habitat seems ideal. Botanists have no idea why. The answer may lie in ancient dispersal limitations. Saguaros simply never colonized beyond a certain point due to subtle shifts in climate history, pollinators, and seed carriers. So while the environment looks right, one of North America's most recognizable plants just doesn't show up. It's a botanical cliff edge where the ecosystem invites a species and the species still says no. Fact 23. The River Wranglers. Borders usually have guards. This one has hydrologists. The International Boundary and Water Commission, IBWC, was created because rivers like the Rio Grande make terrible neighbors. They meander, flood, and cut off land. The IBWC manages that chaos full time. Think of them as a joint task force against gravity and erosion. They don't patrol, they negotiate with water. Without them, the US-Mexico border would have become unrecognizable decades ago. Fact 22. The border has a volcano with a perfect ring of fire. Cerro Colorado near Sonoran, Mexico is one of the best preserved cinder cone volcanoes in North America. It looks like a textbook sketch. A near-perfect ring of black basalt encircling a rust-red crater. Erupted around 30,000 years ago, it spewed fire and ash so uniformly that its symmetry baffles scientists to this day. Its color comes from oxidized minerals in the lava. Literally, a red volcano on the border. Most volcanoes erode or collapse over time, but Cerro Colorado stands weirdly intact, as if the eruption happened last week. It's a geographical oddity, a volcano emoji in real life. Fact 21. A region that runs on 3 clocks. The borderlands operate in layers. First, there's the sand, shifting dunes that reshape themselves every day. Then the water, the Rio Grande adjusting its course over decades. And finally, the tectonic layer, fault lines that can rearrange the land in seconds. All of it happens in the same zone. That means today's terrain isn't guaranteed to exist tomorrow. When you stand on the border, you're standing on 3 geological clocks ticking at once, all trying to rewrite the map at their own pace. Fact 20. You can cross from one desert to another without leaving the border. At the US-Mexico border, the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert meet, but not cleanly. This is one of the rare places on Earth where 2 major deserts overlap, and it creates a weird mashup zone of ecology. You'll find saguaros from the Sonoran standing beside osotillo and yucca from the Chihuahuan. Species that are supposed to be separated by hundreds of miles coexist awkwardly here because elevation, rain patterns, and geology briefly allow it. It's like stepping from one documentary into another without crossing a single road. Geography blurs the lines even where borders try to hold them. Fact 19. The quake that crossed borders instantly. The 2010 El Mayor Cucapa earthquake didn't care about borders. When it struck northern Baja, the seismic shock hit both Mexico and California with equal fury. That's because the Earth's crust here acts like a stretched drumhead, transmitting energy fast and far. Calexico and Mexicali felt the quake at the same moment. Tectonic faults have no loyalty to political boundaries. It wasn't a clean break either. Multiple hidden faults ruptured in sequence. The quake literally shifted the Earth's crust 10 feet and showed us how thin the line is between our side and theirs when the ground decides to move. Fact 18. Touching the ocean in the desert. If you're standing in Santa Elena Canyon, you're in the middle of the desert, right? Wrong. You're actually standing on what used to be a seabed. Those towering limestone walls, ancient marine deposits. This was a warm, shallow ocean 100 million years ago, and the proof is still there. Marine fossils embedded high on the canyon walls. It's a mind-bending contrast. Bone-dry land made entirely of underwater history. It's the ocean's fossilized ghost, exposed by the river slicing through time. Fact 17. The dunes that need to be fed. Back to the Gran Desierto de Altar. You know the dunes exist because wind and the Colorado River teamed up to deliver fresh sediment constantly, but cut off that supply, say by damming the river, and the system starts to starve. The dunes won't just freeze in place, they'll erode themselves to stay active. In this desert, wind is the mover, but sediment is the fuel. Without both, the dunes start to devour themselves. Fact 16. The border is a cutoff point for a giant rodent. Meet the capybara's much smaller cousin, the North American porcupine. Along the southern border, their range ends out of nowhere, not because of walls or roads, but due to climate. South Texas and northern Mexico are simply too hot and dry for them. So they stop. One minute they're clamoring around in New Mexico pinyon forests, the next, gone. That's not just biology, it's a geographic threshold. Many species follow similar patterns, using invisible climate lines like hard walls. The US-Mexico border is full of these unspoken ecological cutoffs, where animals disappear because nature quietly drew the line. Fact 15, a cross-border river that drains away from the border. The San Pedro River is one of the only major rivers in the American Southwest that flows northward out of Mexico into the United States. This makes it one of the rare border-crossing rivers where water enters the U.S. from the south. Most cross-border water systems flow the other way. The San Pedro carves through southern Arizona, supporting one of the most biologically diverse corridors in North America, but its source in the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico creates a directional oddity, a reverse transboundary river that, unlike nearly every other border waterway, flows against national expectations and carries the Mexican monsoon into U.S. deserts. Fact 14, North America's darkest skies. Want to see the Milky Way in full detail? Go to the U.S.-Mexico border. In places like Big Bend and Organ Pipe, the night sky is darker than almost anywhere else in North America. No streetlights, no highways, no cities, just pure starlight. The lack of light pollution allows stars to actually cast shadows. It's one of the last places where you can feel just how huge the universe really is. Fact 13, the desert that blooms overnight. Border deserts look dead until they aren't. Billions of seeds lie dormant underground, waiting. Then, with the right rainstorm, they explode into color. One week, it's brown dust. The next, it's a flower field. Purple, orange, yellow. The whole palette comes out in a race against evaporation. It's the quickest transformation in geography, a barren wasteland becoming a full-blown garden almost overnight. It's pretty much a biological miracle on a clock. Fact 12, trade routes paved in history. Long before there was a border, there were highways, indigenous ones. The border region sits on ancient trade routes that connected the Pacific to the Gulf. Turquoise, cocoa, obsidian, and seashells moved along these corridors. Today, many of our busiest border crossings follow the exact same paths. Geography decided the routes: mountain passes, reliable springs, and flat plains. Modern infrastructure didn't invent these paths, it just paved over trails that had already worked for thousands of years. Fact 11, some places just can't be fenced. You can't out-engineer geography. Parts of the border are simply too wild to fence. Floodplains shift, canyons are too steep, and sandy soils won't hold concrete. Build a fence, and the next storm will bury or wash it away. Engineers have tried and failed to lock down these stretches, only to be outsmarted by the land itself. In the most rugged zones, nature writes the rules, and the border remains not unfenced by choice, but by force. Fact 10, a border dispute lasted nearly 100 years because of a river. The Rio Grande doesn't follow instructions. In the 1860s, it shifted south near El Paso, leaving hundreds of acres stuck between Mexico and the US. The result? The Chamizal dispute. Nearly a century of legal limbo, diplomatic headaches, and conflicting maps. The river refused to return to its previous channel, triggering an international disagreement that dragged out until the 1960s. The solution? Stop trying to convince the river and just move it. Engineers dug new channels, poured concrete banks, and pinned the river in place. It was a rare case of settling a border issue not by negotiation, but by literally redrawing the land with machinery. Fact 9. Certain areas heat faster than global averages. Border deserts are heating up faster than almost any other region on the continent. It's called desert amplification. Dry terrain doesn't absorb heat like wetter regions. It magnifies it. In the summers of 2024 and 2025, cities like Mexicali topped 126 degrees Fahrenheit, literal ovens. The desert acts like a giant heat amplifier because it lacks moisture to absorb and regulate temperature. With no humidity buffer, every degree of global warming hits here harder and faster. Climate scientists track this region closely as a warning system for future extreme heat trends. Fact 8. A volcano field here erupted in human times. Parts of the Pinacate volcanic field erupted just 13,000 years ago, within the window of human memory. Early peoples may have watched fire shoot from the ground, carving massive craters and spilling lava across the desert. Over 400 distinct volcanic features still litter the area, including black lava flows that haven't even begun to erode. This is fresh geological evidence that Earth can still throw temper tantrums here. The terrain looks raw and apocalyptic because it basically is. Fact 7. one river created a massive lake by accident. In 1905, a botched engineering move turned an irrigation error into California's biggest lake. When levees failed during a flood, the entire Colorado River diverted into the Salton Sink, a low-lying basin that hadn't held water in ages. For nearly 2 years, the river poured into the depression, creating what we now call the Salton Sea. Engineers tried everything to redirect the flow, but by the time they did, hundreds of square miles were underwater. Today, the Salton Sea remains a huge inland lake that exists solely because humans miscalculated what water will do when it finds the path of least resistance. Fact 6, where rainfall maps flip over just miles apart. In the mountains straddling the border between eastern Arizona and northern Sonora, rainfall totals can vary by more than 10 inches within just a few miles. That's due to orographic lift, where moisture-rich air slams into mountains and dumps rain on one side, leaving the other dry. In places like the Peloncillo and Chiricahua ranges, this creates hyperlocal microclimates along the border. On the US side, you might find 18 inches of annual rainfall in pine-covered slopes. Just across the line, the Mexican side bakes in dry scrubland with half that. The mountains act as vertical weather switches, reshaping ecosystems, rivers, and even settlement patterns based on which side of the peak you're standing on. Fact 5, a dry lake becomes a perfect mirror after storms. Laguna Salada looks like cracked earth most of the year, until it rains. Then it becomes a 30-mile wide mirror. So flat and smooth, it reflects the sky with such precision that you lose all sense of depth. Pilots and off-roaders report total disorientation during this brief transformation. The lake bed becomes a temporary illusion, where the sky and ground blend into one seamless horizon. And just as quickly as it shows up, the mirage goes away. Within weeks, the water evaporates and it reverts back to bone-dry desert. It's a weather-driven magic trick. Now you see it, now you don't. Fact 4, some border mountains are actually broken crust blocks. The mountains flanking the border weren't built by rising land, they were yanked apart. This is basin and range country, where Earth's crust got pulled so violently that it cracked like ceramic. Some blocks dropped down to form valleys, while others tilted up into sharp, jagged peaks. The result? Alternating stripes of basin and mountain across the land. It's geography shaped by stretching until things broke. These peaks aren't traditional ranges, they're torn fragments of continental crust, each one tilted and displaced by tectonic tension. Fact 3, entire floodplains here can reset in one season. Along the lower Rio Grande, one flood can obliterate decades of geography. In extreme events like 2010's Hurricane Alex or 1932's Great Flood, the river swelled to 50 times its normal width, bulldozing farmland, erasing roads, and redrawing its own channel. It resets the map. Channels shift, levees vanish, and long-established terrain is remade overnight. Afterward, satellite images reveal an entirely new land. Floodplains definitely aren't fixed. They're temporary sketches that water will redraw the moment it gets the chance. Fact 2, border cities often share the same valley and dust. El Paso and Ciudad Juarez are two cities, one basin. They sit in the same geological pocket, the Paso del Norte, sharing weather, water, and air. They both draw drinking water from the Hueco Bolson aquifer. Dust storms roll across the border without hesitation. Pollution? Same deal. What drifts from one side is breathed in on the other within minutes. Even flooding from the Rio Grande impacts both simultaneously. Borders may divide politics, but they don't divide valleys. The two cities are separated by law, but united by terrain. Fact 1, some border markers are over 150 years old. Scattered across deserts and mountains are stone markers from the 1850s to define the international boundary. These obelisks, often remote and untouched, still stand where early surveyors set them. They've withstood floods, earthquakes, and a century and a half of sun without moving an inch. Some are so far off-road they're visited only by wildlife and the rare hiker. They mark not just territory, but endurance. Built to last, they remain silent witnesses to every border dispute and treaty that followed. What about 50 wild facts about Minnesota you never knew?